Just because something's constitutional doesn't make it right. So we need to keep that distinction in mind, and maybe agree with you that we need to really have good proof at hand before we let the state go further. But when that proof exists, and you think it does in this case, then we should go there. But the point is, the Constitution gives the states a lot of power here, maybe more than it should.
And my point about, is the state really concerned about our health? Right now, they're having hearings on legalizing unpasteurized milk, which some people feel is more healthy. It increases natural immunity to diseases, improves digestion. Some people actually need unpasteurized milk for good health. And I think about half the states, even California, which produces more milk than Wisconsin, allows a method for citizens to purchase raw milk if they need it. So is the state protecting people's health, or are they protecting big corporate dairies?
Yeah, and that's true, and this is a real tough issue. This is, again, I got my kids immunized. And I would say it's my responsibility maybe to talk to my brother who didn't want to get his kids immunized and explain the facts to them. But, at some point we have to, be in charge of our own lives. And I have to tolerate things I don't like. Okay, I have to tolerate pornography. I have to tolerate things that maybe should be illegal, but the Constitution says I get to pursue my happiness. And for some people, pursuing their happiness means trusting in the Lord or not trusting science. And I'm just really uncomfortable in any situation that we have to force people to do that.
I can't let the raw milk thing drop. I spent a fair amount, some of my career in public health investigating outbreaks of something called hemolytic uremic syndrome, which can kill children and has killed children. And I've been involved in cases where children died from being exposed to this bacteria, which they get either from undercooked ground beef or raw milk or some other product contaminated from a bovine source. But raw milk is absolutely a source of this, and there's no way you can tell from looking at it or cleaning your facility. The only way you can do it to make sure it's not there is to pasteurize it. So, and you can suggest that the government is, it's all about corporate stuff and conspiracy theories, but the bottom line is there is a real and absolute public health benefit here that is scientifically based.
So that's kind of a collective action problem, that most of us can't make these scientific decisions for ourselves. So we have to rely on some other people that know what they're talking about here to give us the advice that is generally going to be better than our own uninformed advice. And in this area, government or other kinds of public interest groups have tended to do that. But I'm also a political scientist, and I remember what Bismarck said about laws. You don't want to know how they're made for the same reason you don't want to know how sausage is made, all right? What goes into these laws. And obviously, interest group politics is a part of it too. Yeah, there used to be a constitutional regime where the Supreme Court, back before the New Deal, sort of the change in constitutional law, would actually scrutinize laws that were meant to be they had to be shown to be in the public interest if they restricted liberty. And then if there was sufficient evidence to show that the public interest argument was more important than the interest argument, the private interest argument, then the court would uphold it. And I think that was the so-called Lochner era. And I would think that even in the Lochner era, they would have upheld this, all right? Mm-hmm. But there are a lot of other things they would not have upheld that would go along your way. But that's not the constitutional system we live in now. Maybe we should have constitutional reform. Because it hasn't always been like that.
Or we should just maybe follow it. We don't have to reform it, just kind of follow it. They laid it out for us.
Yeah, well, the problem is vague.
Intentionally vague, and I guess that's where states' rights, and maybe the state does have the right to pass these.
But if the state has a power that's better than the feds having it, if
Absolutely.
the feds have it, it affects everybody.
You bet.
Mm-hmm. If it's only the state, you have this state as an experiment, the next state can say, look what happened in Wisconsin. We don't want to go that way, or we want to go that way. So there's more freedom. Federalism is related to freedom, too.
Yeah.
Well, very good. Second case study. 1 week after your conversation with the voter, Pat Smith published an opinion piece
piece in the local paper. Pat Smith is opposed to Jones. Jones wants just to tighten the restrictions. Once again, Smith opposed Jones's bill, but this time Smith advanced a different argument. Quote, a number of area parents request vaccination waivers not for reasons of personal conviction, but on religious grounds, wrote Smith. The risks and benefits of vaccinations are irrelevant to such parents because they rely upon a higher power to sustain the health of their families. Nevertheless, Senator Jones would compel these sincere individuals to watch an online video about those risks and benefits before they send their children to a public school. Surely that imposes a burden upon these religious individuals that isn't shouldered by other parents. And just as surely, the state can't impose such a burden. Once again, the voter is puzzled. And once again, the voter turns to you. How do you advise this voter? And this time we will begin with Dr. Belongia and Ms. Bradley. 5 minutes.
Okay, thanks. Well, sure the state can impose such a burden. That's the short answer. I think this is another, I think, a very reasonable compromise in terms of the soft paternalism here. People are not being forced to vaccinate their children against their will. All they're being forced to do is to watch a video, which we hope will be professionally done and provide accurate scientific information. If it's not, then that's not good. But assuming that to be the case, that it's providing valid, accurate information that scientists would all agree is correct, then all you're doing is you're informing the parent. And from a moral and ethical perspective here, whether this is a religious objection or some other philosophical objection really doesn't matter. Because you don't have any more right to endanger your child for religious reasons than you do for any other reason. And so, so the bottom line is there's no additional burden because they're religious. It's merely because they're choosing to withhold an intervention for the child that most people who are informed would think is in the benefit of their child and potentially could be of a risk or harm to their child if they fail to do that. And so I think this is it's a very appropriate kind of intervention to do.
And I agree with Ed. There are two different kinds of waivers. There's a medical waiver and a non-medical waiver, and all of the non-medical waivers should be treated the same, whether or not it's for beliefs or for religion.
And I think it's important to keep in mind, we sort of got at this earlier, but that there's no doubt there have been multiple studies that have shown that if you mandate vaccination or sort of nearly mandate vaccination by making it a little bit of a burden to opt out, not a horrible burden, but a little bit of a burden, coverage will go up. More kids will get vaccinated. There's no question about that. The other thing that's for which there's really strong evidence is that when coverage goes up, the risk of vaccine-preventable diseases goes down, which makes sense, but it's been shown to be true. And it's also been shown in studies that the risk among children who opt out, who have an exemption from their parents, their risk of getting measles is about 35 times higher than the risk of another child who hasn't opted out. And so that's just sort of an average overall, but that's a hugely increased risk. And again, you could say, well, if I'm talking about myself being vaccinated and I choose to take that risk, fine, nobody has any problem with it. But a child does not have the knowledge to be able to make an informed decision as to whether they choose to accept that risk that their parent is imposing on them. And that's where I think the state has a legitimate interest in providing at least a minimum level of oversight here, and which I don't view this as draconian at all, because in some states they would say, really, if you don't have a medical exemption, you're getting vaccinated, period. This is a lot softer than that. People can opt out. They just have to have, they can't be ignorant and opt out. They have to at least be educated and understand what people know about this from a scientific perspective. And then if they still choose to opt out, they can do it. I'm done.
You have a minute left.
We can just sit here for a minute.
Collect ourselves.
What do you need to do?
Well,
Jim and Paul?
I would say, today is Constitution Day, and we're talking about the First Amendment, and the part that applies here is no law prohibiting the free exercise of religion will be allowed. Well, not vaccinating their children, they consider to be part of the exercise of their religion. And so it shouldn't be allowed unless you amend the Constitution and change that. The people who think that, well, you don't have to honor that because they just believe in some kind of old religious myth rather than the science, it doesn't make any difference. That's their right, and according to the law in Wisconsin, they can opt out for religion or personal conviction, and they don't have to vaccinate. Not many people know that, but and they're not very well informed about vaccinations and what their options are, but those are the laws as I understand them. So, and I think we have to respect other people's points of view, even if we don't agree with them.
And even if they're wrong. As a libertarian, the simple solution to me is you just end compulsory education. Okay? If you do, and we think that people should freely associate. I would certainly educate my children. Just is what's school about? I teach college. By the time I get college students, any modicum of interest in the world is ground out of them. 12 years of what we're doing to our kids kills any semblance of curiosity. So, but that's a whole nother argument. But again, it's the same thing. We're talking about a school district. Kids have to go to school. And therefore, they're going to expose their classmates to maybe some disease that the other classmates shouldn't have had to. So the school said, hey, you can't come to our school unless you get immunized. But it's a public school.
Yeah. But
so so there's all, see how the state's tentacles, it's catch-22 in a lot of ways,
And Amish kids don't go to public schools, and so they aren't affected. They also don't get vaccinated.
And
they also don't get allergies, asthma, Alzheimer's disease, or autism.
And they drink raw milk.
and they drink raw milk. Is that because they don't get vaccinated that they don't have these problems, or is it because the natural immunity that the raw milk gives them? Somebody should do a scientific investigation on that. Why hasn't anybody checked into why the Amish population is healthier than the regular school majority
There
population?
have been lots of outbreaks of vaccine-preventable diseases in Amish
And we
populations.
have to ask you to let them speak.
Oh, I'm sorry, I'm
The
sorry.
5 minutes aren't up yet.
I'm sorry.
But
I was.
hold that thought.
My apologies.
Yeah, no problem.
I thought we were in the,
Yeah.
I just got so caught up in it.
Yeah, no problem.
Hold that thought.
She hasn't stood up yet.
No problem.
Okay, so anyway, are the Amish protected by their religious beliefs? I think that, I don't know if it's because of their religious beliefs or their lifestyle, but they seem to be, something seems to be working for them.
Yeah, and again, where I come from, this is I'm a musician too, and B.B. King says, I pay the cost to be the boss. And so part of this, a lot of this seems to me an insurance company issue, and if you don't immunize your kids, can the insurance company says we're not going to pay for their treatment? Well, then if they seek treatment, then the doctors can't turn them away, right? You got to get them in the emergency room. So, so I'm actually going to kind of help make your argument for you. The religious people probably won't take their kids to the emergency room when they get sick. They're going to pray over them. And so I think that changes the situation a little bit. But I would like to explore, when we have our 15 minutes back and forth, this idea about, if you're on Medicaid, does the state then have the right to make you get an immunization?
Well, we will pick that up in the 15 minutes.
Okay.
Okay, now to the boring legal issue compared to these two. First of all, you don't have free exercise changes the ballgame here in terms of legal weight. Obviously, there's a stronger presence of constitutional rights here than there was in the previous one. But it's not absolute. My personal religion tells me that Denver Broncos are evil and they should all be killed.
Vikings.
I'm an Oakland Raider fan. You can boo and then get over it. But that doesn't give me a right to go kill John Elway, a former Bronco quarterback. Clearly, there's got to be a line to what you can justify in terms of free exercise. And there used to be a distinction between belief and conduct. You can believe what you want. Of course, the First Amendment means anything. It means the government can't tell you what to believe. All right, that's an absolute bedrock principle. But conduct can be different. But as we became more sophisticated, we came to realize that ritual is conduct. A lot of religion requires certain kinds of conduct. So the clear distinction between conduct and belief was broken down somewhat. And in 1961, the Supreme Court, in a famous case, the Sherbert case, ruled that if you can make a plausible free exercise claim, and this had to do with someone who was fired from a job, I think it was a Jehovah's Witness. A lot of First Amendment cases are due to the Jehovah's Witnesses. We owe them a debt. And, and was not paid unemployment insurance because the person quit the job because he had to work on a Sabbath day. And for Jehovah's Witnesses, that was Saturday. And the Supreme Court ruled that, no, he's entitled to it because not going to work on that day and doing that kind of conduct, but not going, was part of their belief. So it came up with a balancing test, not an absolute right test, but a really high level, a high hurdle balancing test called strict scrutiny in constitutional law. The state's got to show that there's compelling state interest in that the state measure here, by not, in this case, not providing for the welfare benefit, or unemployment benefit, was necessary to achieve that end. Strict scrutiny in constitutional law usually means the state loses, okay, and they lost in this case. Well, in 1990, that changed a bit when it came to a criminal law that is universally applied. You may have heard of this, the famous peyote case out of, I think it was in Oregon or Washington, where a Native American group that used peyote as part of their ritual, religious ritual was fired from their jobs working for some drug rehabilitation agency in the state. And the minority in the court applied the Sherbert test. But Scalia, writing for the majority, said, no, this is a neutral criminal law that applies to everybody. And if you break that, you're not entitled to the Sherbert balancing test. And so when it comes to criminal laws, like if this were a criminal thing to not immunize your children, then that case would apply. And you wouldn't have much of a case if you were one of the parents. If, however, it's not criminal, then the Sherbert balancing test would apply. And it's a pretty high level. Given what's at stake, the state might win in this case, okay? I don't think it's entirely clear. Again, it would depend on the facts. So that's sort of where we're at in terms of the law. One of the questions was, is this a slippery slope? If you allow this for one religion, what about others? And the answer is, yeah, you have to apply it to everyone. Because the state can't be in the business of saying, we think your religion's okay, yours is not. It's one reason I disagree with the Amish case, the Yoder case, because the court went out of its way in that case in 1972 to sort of praise the Amish community for being so praiseworthy and responsible and everything. And they go, well, what about some religion that's not that responsible? They're going to get less constitutional protection? That violates core First Amendment tenets. Mm-hmm. So I have some problems with that particular decision in that respect. 1996, the U.S. Supreme Court upheld a $1.5 million judgment against 4 Christian scientists who were at the scene of a girl who died. And she had a very medical condition that was readily rectified. And instead they prayed. The other family members sued both the 4 people that were there plus the Christian Science Church. The Supreme Court, lower courts threw out the suit against the Christian Science Church, but upheld the judgment against the 4. And so in that case, the judgment was allowed. When it comes to Christian Science type cases, often the law is really murky there, depends on the state. And a lot of times they don't prosecute, though they probably could from a constitutional perspective, but they don't, or juries may not convict. The case gets going a ways and then they'll kind of drop it because there are other cases they have to worry about. But this case in 1996 is on the books for Christian Science.
You still have another minute as well.
Oh, I thought you were, okay. It's interesting, what are the exemptions that are allowed? And generally, the most prominent exemption in general is for medical concerns, that maybe this particular child will be hurt by the immunization. The other, second one's religion, and then as in our material is also personal conviction. That tends to be used less than the other two, but it is in Wisconsin, it's used. Do you have a constitutional right to an exemption? If it's religion, yes. But again, you're going to apply either the Sherbert test or the Smith test. Do you have a right to an exemption if you simply have strong philosophical beliefs against it or personal beliefs? The answer from a constitutional perspective is no. The analogy here would be conscientious objection when it comes to the draft. You have a First Amendment right to raise a religious objection to being drafted. Now, depending on, if the enemy's right in our streets, they'll probably throw everybody in there. But other than that, you would have a plausible free exercise claim. Conscientious objection status has been expanded to people who have philosophical or ethical arguments against war. But that's been done by statute, not by Supreme Court